Hi Year 10, Mr. Tapley here for your next lesson of Year 10 Geography. This lesson we are looking at developing our understanding of how different cultures value well-being. So what do they prioritize? Do they prefer to put a lot of effort and time into improving their health or their wealth maybe? And how can we measure well-being? So we need to understand what human well-being is, but to improve it, we need to be able to measure it because we don't know if it's good or bad. And if we don't know if it's good or bad, we can't figure out the problem and how to fix it. So our success criteria is to define two types of measurements for human well-being, which are qualitative and quantitative well-being factors, and identify how different cultures around the world value specific well-being factors. As we discussed in previous lessons, there are different well-being factors that influence our health and happiness. So your education, medicine, access to food and water, etc., etc. Different nations, communities, and even groups will value specific factors as more important than others. So some nations value education over financial success. If you go over to America, they pride in having a strong military, spending all that money on the army. Some countries value religion or family, community connections. Lots of different ways of approaching the world. To improve well-being, though, we need to be able to identify areas of concern and then measure well-being levels in those areas. The tools used to measure well-being can be defined as one of two things. They're either qualitative well-being levels or quantitative. Quantitative indicators, when you hear that word quantitative, think quantities, think numbers, percentages, decimals, lots of numbers. So quantities, numbers. Quantitative indicators of well-being provide very accurate, very precise, measurable comparisons. So well-being factors that can be assessed with specific quantities, numbers. For example, life expectancy. So that's going to give you a specific number. Percentage of population living in poverty. That's a well-being factor being assessed with a specific number. You're not going to be like, oh, there's a good amount of people in poverty or a average amount of people. You're going to give a specific percentage, a specific number. On the other hand, qualitative indicators are a description of the quality. So quantitative, think numbers, quantities. Qualitative, you're really looking at high, medium, low, stuff like that. So you're looking at the quality and the characteristics rather than a specific measurement. They're often subjective. So you might think, I have a high level of freedom of speech in my country, but someone else in that country might say, well, actually, I have a low level of freedom of speech. So for example, for qualitative, you could be looking at the quality of food supplies. So if I gave you 10 nuggets from Macca's, some people would be like, this is a high amount of food. And if you gave that to me, I'd be like, this is a low amount of food. You need to up your game. Housing quality, you might be happy with a 1-bedroom house. Some people might need 4 bedrooms, depending on their family. Freedom of speech. So there are things that we measure in well-being that are quantities, numbers, or qualitative, where you're looking at, again, high, medium, low usually. A few common well-being indicators are GDP, which you might have heard about in Year 9 economics, or if you're doing BizMan or accounting. So GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product, and it's basically how much money you have, either the country or person in that country, how much money they have. HDI is another well-being indicator called the Human Development Index, and that basically is a fancy number for human well-being, so our health and our happiness. Historically, the most common measure of human well-being has been income. So when people have been asked, what is your country like? What is their human well-being? We'd usually go by money. So the national progress was measured by wealth. GDP is the total value of goods and services being produced. So the things that are being bought and sold in that country. GDP per capita, think per person. So GDP per capita measures the average wealth of individual people in the nation. So the GDP of Australia might be $3 billion, and the GDP per capita might be, okay, well, the average person in Australia makes $40,000, something like that. However, we've looked at a number of well-being factors in the previous few lessons. Money isn't the only thing that impacts your well-being. It's not the only thing that impacts your happiness. I'm sure some of you will disagree, but we know that wealth is only one well-being factor. GDP has been criticized for failing to consider other aspects influence our health and happiness. So I could have a lot of money, I don't, but if I did, that doesn't necessarily mean I will be happy and healthy. If I have $1 million, but the closest hospital is 3 hours away, I'm going to be pissed off. If I have $1 million, but I don't have access to water nearby, I don't have running electricity, that's going to impact my well-being. So, to give you a more accurate idea of human well-being in a place, HDI is often the preferred way of measuring well-being. So HDI, the Human Development Index, measures life expectancy, so our health, literacy, so our education, our ability to read and write, education, and then GDP per capita. So it's measuring a lot of different factors and then smushing all those numbers together to give us one number indicating human well-being. So it provides a very comprehensive summary. I recommend you check out that video down the bottom there, Health versus Wealth Around the World. Very famous dude here, Dr. Hans Rosling, and he goes on to show the links between health and wealth across 200 years in 200 countries. So all those little dots there, you might remember that from Gapminder. That's a Gapminder graph that he's used. All the different dots represent different countries, and you can see he's measuring money, so wealth, versus life expectancy, so health. That's just after World War II, I think he's looking at. Anyway, now I've lost my slides. All right then. So what are we doing this lesson? So with that information, I'd like you to read Different Views of Wellbeing, which is on pages 142 to 143. So chapter 3, and you're just answering 3 questions in your digital notebook. So I'll show you where that is. So you're reading through this. You can see it tells you about qualitative and quantitative data, HDI. It shows you how different countries value different levels of well-being. For example, in Bhutan, they actually have their own way of measuring the country's progress, which is GNH. Again, lots of acronyms in geography, but this is what we want right here. We want these 3 questions. So question 1, what is gross domestic product? That one should be easy for you. And why is it often used as a measure of well-being? So why is GDP often used as a measure of well-being? Question 1. 1 or 2 sentences. Question 2. How do you think gross national happiness would be measured? So would that number there be a qualitative or a quantitative figure? You know, how would they go out and determine GNH of Bhutan, of another country? So you have to read about GNH in this paragraph here. And then question 3. Why do you think other countries have not adopted Bhutan's measure of GNH? So most countries don't use GNH to measure well-being, they measure health and wealth, so GDP and HDI. But Bhutan have their own little thing here. Why do you think other countries don't use that? Do they have a problem with GNH? Do they think it's not accurate? Do they think it's not useful? Do they value different things? So questions 1 to 3, page 143 in chapter 3. Second half of what we are doing. You've got a few well-being indicators here. So unemployment rate, obesity population percentage, access to public transport, quality of teaching at your school, be nice. What you need to do for this question, write those out in your book. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you need to put either qualitative or quantitative next to those well-being indicators. So you're just copying down those, and you're going to tell me if it's quantitative, so numbers, percentages, decimals, or if it's something measured on quality, so high, medium, low usually, or average, or whatever. Anyway, so 2 parts to our lesson activities today. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. Otherwise, best of luck guys, hope you're well, and cheers.